Chicago, September 2nd, 2025. In the heart of Chicago, a press conference unfolded that captured the simmering tensions between local leadership and Washington. Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker and Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson stood shoulder to shoulder, addressing a storm of controversy stirred by President Donald Trump's remarks suggesting the deployment of federal troops to the streets of Chicago. The encounter was not just a political rebuttal, it was a forceful declaration of local autonomy and a plea for resources, not soldiers. The event, held inside a state government building with television cameras rolling, was framed by the gravity of the past 10 days. Violence in parts of Chicago had heightened national concern, but for city and state leaders, the prospect of military presence carried heavier risks than potential benefits. Both officials leaned into their microphones to make clear that Chicago would chart its own path without uniformed soldiers patrolling neighborhoods. Governor Pritzker, a Democrat who has frequently clashed with Trump, opened the conference. The cameras had captured him and Mayor Johnson walking side by side, a picture of solidarity. Their expressions were solemn, their tone deliberate. As the governor spoke, it was evident he intended to set the record straight, not just for Illinoisans, but for a national audience closely following this unfolding political clash. The press conference came after Trump's nationally televised comments earlier in the day, in which the president reiterated his claim that Chicago leaders should request troops directly from him. For the governor, that suggestion crossed both political and constitutional lines. J.B. Pritzker began with one of his most pointed statements yet in the ongoing confrontation with the White House. J.B. Pritzker said, "So in the absence of significant federal coordination, we've gathered information from unauthorized patriotic officials inside the government and from well-sourced reporters about Donald Trump's plan, which is to deploy armed military personnel to the streets of Chicago. I'm aware that the President of the United States likes to go on television and beg me to call and ask him for troops. I find this extraordinarily strange, as Chicago does not want troops on our streets." His words reverberated in the room, underscoring his conviction that military deployment was not only unnecessary but unwelcome. To Pritzker, the suggestion was rooted in political theatrics rather than practical governance. He pressed on, sharpening his criticism of the president's behavior. J.B. Pritzker said, "First, I want to address the president's unhinged remarks a few minutes ago, begging me to call him. No, I will not call the president asking him to send troops to Chicago. I've made that clear already. I know this has been an unsettling and difficult 10 days for the people of Chicago and Illinois. I'm going to do my best to share what we know as of today and speak frankly to the people of Illinois." By emphasizing transparency, Pritzker framed himself as a calm counterweight to what he described as the White House's erratic messaging. He sought to reassure residents that decisions affecting Chicago would be made locally with their safety and dignity in mind. The governor's tone shifted slightly as he moved from rejecting troop deployment to addressing the heart of his demand, federal funding. For Pritzker, this was about justice for taxpayers and accountability from Washington. J.B. Pritzker said, "I refuse to play a reality game show with Donald Trump again. What I want are the federal dollars that have been promised to Illinois and Chicago for violence prevention programs that have proven to work. That is money that Illinois taxpayers send to the federal government, and it's an insult to any and every citizen to suggest that any governor should have to beg the president of any political party for resources owed their people." This statement cut to the central grievance. While Washington spoke of soldiers, Illinois was asking for money to support programs that had already demonstrated impact in curbing violence. The governor reminded reporters that Illinois taxpayers contribute billions annually to the federal treasury, making the withholding of funds feel like a political punishment rather than a budgetary necessity. His words reflected broader Democratic criticism of the Trump administration's handling of federal-state relationships, where loyalty to the president often seemed a prerequisite for receiving assistance. When Mayor Brandon Johnson took the podium, his message was aligned with the governor's, but delivered with the urgency of a city leader responsible for daily safety and stability. His remarks were sharp, unequivocal, and unapologetic. Brandon Johnson said, "We do not want or need military occupation in our city. We do not want or need militarized immigration enforcement in our city. We have been clear on that, and we will continue to take every single measure that we can to protect our people from these threats." For Johnson, the idea of troops patrolling Chicago neighborhoods conjured images not of safety, but of disruption. an intrusion that risked further fraying trust between communities and authorities. His invocation of immigration enforcement underscored another layer of concern, the potential use of federal troops or agencies to advance policies beyond public safety, veering into politically charged arenas. The mayor stressed that local law enforcement, social services, and community organisations were better equipped to address the city's challenges. His focus remained on partnership and investment, not force. The confrontation between Illinois leaders and Trump fits into a wider national pattern. Chicago has long been a rhetorical target for the president, who has frequently pointed to its crime rates as evidence of democratic mismanagement. For Trump's critics, this narrative oversimplifies the complexities of urban violence while ignoring decades of systemic issues that cannot be solved through military presence. Governor Pritzker and Mayor Johnson's joint press conference was thus not only about rejecting troops, but also about rejecting a storyline that cast Chicago as a city perpetually in crisis, incapable of governing itself. Their response also raised constitutional questions. The Posse Comitatus Act, a law dating back to the 19th century, restricts the use of federal troops for domestic law enforcement unless Congress or the president invokes specific emergency powers. Trump's repeated insistence that governors personally ask him for troops reflects his interpretation of executive authority, but also exposes tensions over the limits of presidential power. Beyond the legalities, the political fallout was immediate. Chicago residents expressed a mix of fear and defiance at the possibility of soldiers in their neighborhoods. Community leaders stressed that militarization often worsens tensions, particularly in Black and Latino communities that already report strained relationships with law enforcement. Meanwhile, national media framed the story as another dramatic confrontation between Trump and Democratic governors, a familiar dynamic from earlier crises, including the COVID-19 pandemic. The governor's sharp rebukes were quickly replayed on cable news, with pundits debating whether Pritzker's stance reflected genuine constitutional concerns or partisan positioning. At the state level, lawmakers from Illinois largely rallied behind Pritzker. Democratic representatives echoed his call for federal funding over military deployment, while some Republicans argued that the governor was dismissing legitimate public safety concerns for political gain. The press conference underscored two competing visions for addressing urban violence, one rooted in military presence and federal control, the other in local autonomy and resource allocation. For Pritzker and Johnson, the matter was clear. Chicago needed investments, not troops. The governor's closing words set the tone for the broader fight ahead, a refusal to bend to what he described as political theatre, and a demand that Illinois receive its fair share of federal support. The mayor's final remarks amplified that message, painting a picture of a city determined to resist external interference. As the cameras clicked and the press conference ended, the message from Chicago's leaders rang loud and clear. The city's future would not be dictated from Washington, nor secured by military boots on the ground. Instead, it would be shaped by community, investment, and the resolve of local leadership to stand firm in the face of federal pressure.